My name's Shannon Regan. I work with the Friends of the Gallatin National Forest Avalanche Center. I'm the education coordinator. So I work closely with the Gallatin National Forest Avalanche Center to produce educational products that reach people across Southwest Montana and the surrounding communities. So this year I've been anywhere from Island Park or Idaho Falls, Idaho, the kind of far southern extent of where we work. And then I've been out to, Red Lodge, Billings, Cook City, and as far north as Anaconda. That's as far north as I've gotten this year. So kind of Southwest Montana. Um, I loved reading through all of your intros. Obviously, because of what I do for work, I kind of live to be outside in the snow and when it's snowing hard. My personal favorite winter recreation is currently snowmobiling. I've gotten really into riding in the big mountains, so it's pretty fun. But I just like being outside in the snow. I've always been fascinated by snow, and when I was younger, did not know I could have a career working in snow. So I like being able to share that with people. Yeah, and I don't know, maybe Bethany, you can help me out here. I don't know, do people want to introduce themselves just really quick because it's a small call, just like verbal introduction?
Sure, we could do that.
Yeah, it's a short call. I probably have like a half an hour to 40 minutes worth of stuff to talk about. And then plenty of time for questions. So I think we got time for it. But yeah, if maybe I'll just call on people if they're okay with that. Um, and if for some reason you can't talk, you can always just put it in the chat that you can't turn your mic on. So I'll go start with A first. I'll start with Alicia. You want to just introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Alicia Gelman. I'm the youth program coordinator with the Stevens Youth Center. I guess work with Bethany. And yeah, I'm mom of four, twin girls at home currently. Surprisingly calm, so you can't hear them right now. And yeah, it's currently snowing. At some point, I'll trek out there. And today is actually my 11-year wedding anniversary. So
Congrats.
not forcing my husband to go to lunch today. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Next up, we'll go Delaney. We'll just go alphabetical.
Let's see. You got in the
You
chat, Delaney said she was just here for fun. We'll ask to unmute, but if you're not able to, Delaney, that's fine.
ask to unmute. We'll give her a couple more seconds here. Oh, can't get unmuted. All good. Thanks, Delaney. Jessica, if you want to introduce yourself.
My name is Jessica Johnston. I'm with Code Girls United, headquartered out of Kalispell, Montana, but we do have programs across the entire state of across the entire state. And after 50 years of living in the snow, I'm over it and like to sit by a fire or just inside as well.
Thanks, Jessica. Rachel, do you want to go?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Rachel Wonderscheid. I'm the director of the Montana After School Alliance. I am actually supposed to be in Helena for meetings today, but I am based in Polson and I'm kind of trying to get myself ready, but also trying to figure out if I'm going to make it. I don't like winter, but I do choose to like ski and be outside some of winter to make it go by faster. But I do feel like one of the things that always um, scares me about like taking that to a different level with like backcountry skis is avalanche. So that's one of the reasons why I'm on this call today.
Cool. Well, I might just get going with my screen share and just start working through my slides. This is intended to be pretty informal, so if you have a question, feel free to either throw it in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask. Um, I talk to a lot of people. Delaney's back in the waiting room. I talk to a lot of both adults and youth about avalanches and avalanche safety. This is what I do for a full-time job at this point. So I can definitely just get going and start talking, but this is more about what you all want to know and what you want to know about the Friends of GNFAC education program, and maybe more broadly, like avalanche education resources in the state of Montana. Like many of you all, I'm like a resource person. And so if you have questions about how to connect organizations to avalanche safety or winter safety resources, I'm kind of the person to ask. We're the largest program in the state of Montana. So definitely I can help connect you to more local resources if you're interested. But I think we'll just get going with my screen share, and it'll just take me a second to shuffle my screen. Let's see. Okay. Can everyone see a PowerPoint with a picture of an avalanche? Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. So I've given this talk at a handful of different conferences, and I was so excited when Bethany reached out to me, because since the pandemic, since 2020, like our program had previously taught in a lot of different school programs across Southwest Montana. And many of those contacts and many of the programs we were running took like a pretty big pause. And so we've been actually pretty out there trying to market our programs again, because we love teaching youth. And there's a couple reasons for that I'll explain. We already kind of did intros, but I have worked in the avalanche industry since 2012 as a ski patroller first, and I've worked as a ski guide and an educator. And like I was saying, my latest favorite activity, I think maybe it's because I've been skiing for work for the last 12 years. I love getting out on machines. Very fun. So we already talked a bit about who you all are, but I wanted to put it out there. Why we run programs like this is think for a moment about your students or the people you interact with at work, and how many of them are interested in getting outside in Montana in the winter. And think, like, how many of them do you think interact with avalanche hazard? And the answer I've always consistently found when I go to schools and talk about avalanches is more than you think. Maybe I'm a little biased because I live in Bozeman, and a lot of our kids are out skiing at Big Sky or Bridger Bowl, or out hiking or hunting or doing a variety of mountain-based activities. But I'm consistently surprised at how many kids are interacting with snow-covered mountains. And then think for a moment too, how many months of the year do our mountains have snow in them? Like 6 months, 8 months, sometimes more. So this is like a really relevant topic for many students in Montana. Yeah, did anyone want to add anything about what types of activities their students engage in? The other thing that I've found, depending on the communities you work with, in Southwest Montana, many, and especially too now that we operate in northeastern Idaho, so like Idaho Falls area, is many students in more rural towns, snowmobiling is like a full family activity. Like the entire family likes snowmobiling and they all go out together. And that's really distinctly different than kids who are raised skiing at ski areas. And we'll talk about why that's different from a risk management standpoint. But I think avalanche safety information for families that are going out snowmobiling is really important for people to recognize the risk that they're taking. It's like, that's kind of the first step. And that's a little bit about what this talk is about. So some things we're going to talk about. And this is a picture of a snowmobiler with an avalanche on a slope in the background. The avalanche hasn't run all the way to where that snowmobile is on this day, but surprisingly, where this snowmobiler is on some days, you could have an avalanche come all the way to where they are in the flats. So that's why knowing about a little bit more about avalanches can be really important to keep yourself safer. But we want to learn a bit more about what avalanches are, why are they dangerous, and then how do we learn more about it and make more informed choices about how we go out and recreate or how we go move around in the mountains. And then the final thing is like, what the heck does this have to do with youth science education? So this is a group of a bunch of our staff. We're up at Bridger Bowl. You can see we're all pretty smiley, happy people. We're all generally pretty psyched about getting outside and teaching people. That's kind of, a lot of us are mountain professionals, whether that's working as guides for a living or working as ski patrollers or some combination of those. And most of us are pretty excited to help teach other people. But what we really want to convey to people is the basics. Like, I think when we think about the big picture with avalanches, people can be quite overwhelmed and it can feel like this natural hazard you have no control over. And that's actually not really the case. It's like avalanches happen with more or less consistent patterns. And if we can recognize areas that are dangerous and why they happen, we can take a lot of steps to keep ourselves safer. So it's a very like actionable zone to keep yourself safer. The most important thing that we try to convey to people, especially more novice recreationalists, is that there is some essential safety gear and it's really important to carry it and know how to use it. And that can really affect the outcome if you're in an area that avalanches happen and you're caught in an avalanche. And then the final thing is like, there are a lot of resources out there, even in a state like Montana, where if you look at a map of avalanche forecast zones, there's a lot of mountains that don't have avalanche forecasts. But there are these forecast areas and you can use the information from our public products. These are free public products to help yourself make choices about how you're exposing yourself to risk. So ultimately that's like some really basic things we try to convey. And at a school age level, for the most part, we're just trying to get kids interested. Like a lot of these kids ski and snowmobile, they like being in the mountains, and it's just like eye-opening for them to see videos of avalanches and pictures of avalanches and talk about why those are happening and where they're happening and what to do about it. So that's kind of the most basic level stuff. So the start of that conversation with kids is asking them, what is an avalanche? So does anyone want to tell me, what do you think an avalanche is? It's simpler. The answer is simpler than you think. I'll show a couple videos. We'll see if we can get closer to our definition of an avalanche. So we do have a couple different types of avalanches. And why that's worth knowing is they can look different and the causes of them are different. So we have these loose snow avalanches and we have slab avalanches. So if my videos work like they did in our check, we'll see if we can spot some differences. Okay, so hopefully this video works. Oh, it's already paused. Let's see if it's going to run. Okay, let me try it again. So this is a loose snow avalanche. Okay, now I'm going to go to a video of a slab avalanche. Oh, hold on. Let me see if I can get off. So here is a video of a slab avalanche. Okay. So before we move on, I saw a message popped up in the chat. Let me see if I can pull that back up. Okay, so Rachel said avalanches are basically when snow moves from where it falls to a new location. And basically an avalanche is snow moving down a mountain. And so the primary difference between those two different types of avalanches, loose avalanches are snow that doesn't stick to what's below it and it slides down the mountain. Slab avalanches, did you see how in that video the slope fractured like a pane of glass? So that has to do with snow that bonds to itself. And then there's snow that it's not bonding to underneath it. And when that snow that's bonded to itself begins, like it basically fails, and then it fractures the slope and slides down the mountain. So the main thing to know about avalanches is most people who are caught and killed in avalanches are in slab avalanches. And part of that is because of the way they break across slopes can be very dangerous. So on a basic level, let's see if I can get my screen to, on a basic level, slab avalanches are the most dangerous to people. So that's what we kind of want to know about why they form and how they form. And we need 4 things to have slab avalanches. And so the kind of most important thing is we need a steep enough slope to slide. Because if you have what we call a layered snowpack with this cohesive bonded snow and then this loose snow, you could have that on a flat slope and it's not dangerous. So we need a steep enough slope so that when the slope fails, gravity overcomes friction. And that's kind of where science gets into this, is like, if we have too much friction, the snow is going to stay on the slope. But if we tilt the slope steep enough, we can overcome that frictional force of the snow holding itself on the mountain. So we need to have this layered snowpack, a steep enough slope. And the question I always consider is like, okay, if we have mountains with layered snowpacks and steep slopes, why don't we have avalanches all the time? Like every single day, avalanches firing off. And it's kind of this magical extra ingredient, which is like, we need a dynamic load to cause the failure of a slope, to cause the failure of that snowpack. And that trigger could be us. It could be a snowmobiler. It could be a bison in Yellowstone. It could be an additional load from snow or wind. So we could have natural triggers, or we could have artificial or external triggers. So all this video is showing is just like the concept of a snowpack changing over time. So snowpacks are really dynamic, and part of that has to do with snow as a natural material. So a bit about me, I studied civil engineering and earth science at MSU. And snow is actually just like any engineering material, except what's so different about it is it exists really close to its melting point all the time. So could you imagine, like, if you had a material like, for example, concrete or steel that was always right next to both its melt point and its vapor point? And like, that would be, you wouldn't want to build anything with those materials because that's unstable. So that's like part of why snow is such an unstable material, is just the physical property of it existing in like all 3 of its phases at once. So here's just a quick video example of the difference in layers. And like, what's the primary difference is how hard is this snow compared to what's around it. And when we think about that recipe for an avalanche, we need to have cohesive or bonded snow and then not cohesive snow under it. And I think this video shows that really well. So all this person is doing is pushing into the snow with their fist, with about the amount of force it would take to push your nose, like just the tip of your nose in, just so it hurts a little bit, just for context. So this is pretty firm snow. And then, oh, what's going on there? That is not firm snow. So that's what we're talking about, the difference in layers and density of snowpack. And that's like garage science there. Like we're just like, oh, that's pretty hard. Okay, wait, no, that's pretty soft. Like you don't need to have very much training to be able to tell hard over soft, right? It's just relational. So one more time. This is our type of snowpack that produces avalanches. And it's not always this obvious. Sometimes it can be like really small layer changes over time. So I figured I'd put it out there before we talk a little bit more about where avalanches happen. But does anyone have any questions about like the nature of snow as a material and the layered snowpack? I think people, especially kids, have a lot of experience feeling different types of snow. So it's like, how many of you have, been outside and you go to grab some snow and it doesn't want to make a snowball? That's an experience probably most of us living in Montana have had, versus snow that makes a good snowball right away. So that's like, those are our two different types of snow. And we have way more than just two, but if you're making it really simple, those are the two primary types. Cool. So any questions about snowpack or snow as a material? All right, now the really important part is like, this is, if students can learn one thing from our classes, or if you all can take away one thing, it's that avalanches happen in specific terrain. And it's very knowable with training, and you can identify those pieces of terrain and avoid them if you don't want to be caught in an avalanche. So the pictures on the screen, I would say the uppermost picture, adjacent to where do avalanches occur. So that's across from Big Sky Resort. That's Wilson Peak in Big Sky, Montana. That is very obvious avalanche terrain. And why it's obvious is you have this mountain, number one, with an avalanche on it. If you zoom in, you can see the avalanche. But why it's so obvious even without the avalanche is you all can look at the trees, and there's areas that are densely treed, and then there's areas with no trees. And it's like, where did those trees go? They were hit by avalanches. So we have what are called really obvious avalanche paths, where the avalanche starts and it runs through a path and then it stops. So that picture has really obvious avalanche paths on it. The picture below that doesn't have any trees on it. So it's way less obvious that that's an avalanche path. It also has an avalanche on it in the picture just to show where the avalanche runs. But we want to differentiate, like if we can't visually determine that there have been avalanches in an area in the past by the vegetative or tree clues, we need to default to how steep is the slope. And that's something that we can measure and know from historical information. So the final picture is the one with the avalanche going over a groomed trail. This avalanche was triggered in Gallatin Canyon, I think about 7, 8 years ago. It was triggered by a snowmobile club groomer. He was in a snowcat, like a snow groomer, and he was grooming on a compacted trail and triggered an avalanche on the slope above him. And the avalanche knocked him off the trail in the groomer, so really large machine, and drug him like 700 feet down the hill. And he was fine. He was very scared because that's scary to get caught in an avalanche. But this is a picture of him standing next to his avalanche. And you can see in the background, there's pretty dense trees. And where the avalanche path is, the trees are much smaller. And some of them are like bent over. And those are some like kind of telltale signs of avalanche terrain. Like if the underlying geology of the mountain isn't what's producing the lack of vegetation, you should be curious about if avalanches are what's producing that. Especially in Montana, most of our mountainous terrain isn't above tree line. So trees can be very helpful visual indicators for us.
Shannon, I have a question.
Yeah.
So does that mean like sometimes I'll look at a mountain like that and see those empty paths, and I know I'm at Bridger Bowl or I'm at Showdown. Like, do the ski hill runs, are they more prone to avalanche than too because there's no trees in the way?
So the kind of like baseline question is it steep enough to slide? And that's what this slide is getting into. And what's happening at ski areas that's different is most ski areas are producing avalanches in the mornings before paying customers get on the slopes. So ski areas will have more avalanches because they're artificially inducing avalanches every time it snows. And so you'll see areas like the Bridger Ridge is most of it is steep enough to avalanche, just based off of even this criteria. Most avalanches are happening on 30-degree or steeper slopes. And so at Bridger Bowl, for example, or Whitefish is a pretty steep mountain, a lot of slopes are steeper than 30 degrees, and those will regularly see avalanches. And so they'll be taking down trees. But oftentimes the other thing happening at ski areas is they are taking the trees out of the runs to like make groomers and stuff. So it's a combo, but most ski areas are producing avalanches on steep terrain so that they're paying customers don't trigger avalanches. And that's where I started learning a lot more about avalanches, was working as a ski patroller. You get to go trigger avalanches every time it snows, and it's pretty fun.
Cool.
But yeah, so I
Cool,
think what's
thanks.
important,
As a non-skier, I was curious. Thank you.
yeah, so like the Bridger Range where I live has a ton of really obvious big avalanche paths, and you can see them visually from the highway. And it's partially because it's so treed here that it's just easy to see them. I'll show a couple other pictures here. So steepness, I think what's more important than like getting too bogged down in like what's steep enough, what's too steep, is like statistically most avalanches happen 30 to 45 degrees. Below 30 degrees, it's not impossible to have avalanches, but it's very unlikely. And there's specific circumstances like when you have liquid water running through a snowpack, you can get avalanches on lower angle slopes. But what's almost more important is avalanche terrain is like places where it's steep enough for avalanches to start. This, where we're most likely to have an avalanche start, is that steep slope. But we need to be concerned with like, what if we're on a flat slope that's directly under a steep slope? That's where an avalanche could impact us still. Things like groomed runs or groomed trails or summer trails that aren't necessarily built with avalanche hazard in mind. So on this picture, there's some kind of visual clues. There's like our open steep slope, but then what's under it, you can see the trees are really different than the surrounding vegetation. This is in Utah, so there's also aspen tree. And I don't know if anyone's an ecologist here, but aspen are often called like a regenerative or a regen species. And oftentimes you'll see things like aspen or alders in slide paths because the large mature like, you know, pine forests or fir, like those can't regrow as quickly as the regen species. So just a cool little add-in of like why you'll sometimes see trees in different patterns across terrain. In this part of Utah, aspen also, they really like growing on south-facing slopes where there's maybe not enough moisture for those conifers to grow. So just something cool to note. So a way that we gauge slope steepness is with these tools called inclinometers. My phone also has an inclinometer in it. Everyone's cell phone has one. So there's like lots of different ways to know how steep a slope is. It just takes practice and training to gauge slope steepness. You can see in this picture, the average slope steepness of this slope behind my coworker Dave is 25 degrees. So based on what I already told you all, do you think this slope is steep enough to slide? Like just in this picture.
You said it was 30, right?
Yeah.
So yes.
So 25 degrees, it's under 30 degrees.
Oh, it's
So
under.
yeah.
So
So
that was my
this
question. You said it's under 25, or it is 25 or it's 30. Sorry, I
this
misheard.
slope, the way that you use this tool, does everyone see the little ball floating in the like mineral oil on this slope gauge? So that means this slope is 25 degrees approximately. And by the criteria I just gave you all, if this slope doesn't have a steeper slope above it, it is not avalanche terrain. So that's kind of there's like an asterisk. You're like, okay, this slope I'm seeing, but is this picture the whole slope? You don't know that based off this picture. So you could have honestly been like, oh, you didn't give me enough information, Shannon. But yeah, does that make sense? So like by our like really simple criteria, this slope isn't steep enough to avalanche. And typically with youth groups, we get them inclinometers in their hands and we have a couple pictures or we draw some lines on boards and we practice measuring slope angles. In real life, it can be complicated. Like there's not really simple answers sometimes. But we always want to default to using like what we can see with our eyes and if we see small trees or we see an obviously steep slope, and especially based on experience, like a lot of people who ski are used to being on steeper slopes, but you can use that as a helpful guideline of like, oh, I know what it feels like to be on a 35-degree slope, and that's avalanche terrain. Hopefully that makes sense. I think the important thing to realize is that a lot of times people trigger avalanches on the steep slope itself. You can also trigger avalanches from underneath steep slopes or adjacent to steep slopes if you have really dangerous conditions, because the snowpack is connected across whole terrain features. So if you can cause that cohesive slab snow to collapse onto the weak snow on a flat spot, and that travels up the slope, where it's steep enough to slide, it will. So that's kind of a confusing thing, I think, for people. But that is called a remote trigger. And if we have really dangerous, unstable snowpack, we can see people triggering avalanches from below a steep slope, which is kind of scary, right? So that's just important to know about. So here's a couple of videos. I hope they're going to play of just people triggering avalanches. This one, they're triggering it on the steep slope. So that's the avalanche, and this person is able to ski off the slope and stop themselves, so they're not injured. But that's them triggering the avalanche on the slope. The next video is one of those remote triggers that I was talking about. This person is not on the steep slope, they're next to it. And they got the snowpack to collapse, and where it was steep enough, it slid. So just cool examples of avalanches. And neither of these people were injured in this. And honestly, you can learn a lot about avalanches by seeing them. So let me see what else I have here. So back to those kind of four main ingredients. I think something that's important for students to recognize, like I was talking about earlier, is when we're used to skiing in bounds at a ski area, basically that's what's called a mitigated environment. Like the risk has been reduced. And so you can get really used to skiing and snowboarding on steep slopes and feeling safe. And I would say like safety is a relative term. Obviously you can go ski at a ski area and get injured still. You can also go to a ski area and trigger an avalanche still. It's just very unlikely. I think it was 2 years ago, there was an inbounds avalanche accident in Lake Tahoe. And a couple years before that, there was a very large inbounds avalanche at Silver Mountain, Idaho. The one at Silver Mountain, I think, buried 7 people. at least one person died from that. So it's just worth like people recognizing that when you're in steep mountains and there's snow, avalanches are on the table. And what ski areas do greatly reduces the risk to customers at the ski areas. But once you choose to go in the backcountry, the risk isn't being reduced for you. So you have to be able to recognize conditions that cause avalanches and places where avalanches happen. That's kind of like the responsibility of being able to go wherever you want in the mountains, is you need to understand the dangers that are associated with that. Okay, so I think I only have a couple slides left, but let's think back to what do we need to have an avalanche? You can just shout it out or drop it in the chat. We need 4 things, right?
You need a trigger.
Yeah, we need a trigger. What are the other things we need?
A steep slope.
Steep slope. And then the final that I think can be a little confusing is we need a layered snowpack. And so the activity that we often do with school groups is we build, here, we'll go through my pointers here. We build a layered snowpack. So this is an activity you could easily do with just about any age group. We primarily, like, our kind of target for our curriculum is middle school age. Like, we try to get into 6th and 7th grade classrooms, but we have done this activity for youth down to, oh, I don't know, like 2nd or 3rd grade. I think it gets a little confusing for youth that are too young to understand slope steepness and slope angles. So that's just something to be aware of, is like, if you don't have a concept of what a slope is, or what those numbers could mean in relation to like a 360 degree or 180 degree total, kind of like, oh gosh, what's the word for it? Like, if you've never like played with a protractor or slope angles, this could be pretty confusing. So that's kind of an age appropriate consideration, I guess. The other thing we've found is like showing avalanche rescue equipment to kids. If they don't understand what decimals are, it's very hard to use avalanche beacons because they produce numbers that have decimals. So those are kind of the age appropriate considerations. So this activity, super simple. We're going to try to make a slab avalanche with normal household materials. It takes about 10 minutes. And these are the materials you need. So you need to have just normal cooking flour, chunky rock salt, like what you put on your driveway. And then you need some kind of board that you can tilt up. And then you need enough room to make a mess, because this can be really messy. So these are the materials we're talking about. So when we think back to our recipe for a slab avalanche, how do we make an avalanche with these 2 materials on a steep slope? One message in the chat. Oh, nice. Yeah, it is very fun. Even, you know, honestly, we've done this activity with high schoolers, and like, you'd think kind of high schoolers would be like, this, I'm too cool for school for this. And they all will just start like yelling and screaming, and they get really excited because you get to like make a mess and make something break. And they're all just so curious about it, and they think it's really fun. So that it is a cool activity. But when we think about these 2 materials, how would we layer our avalanche board to make an avalanche? Any ideas?
Would you like
flat-
alternate the layers, like do like a flour layer and then a salt layer and then like another flour layer or something like that?
Ooh, yes. So we want ultimately the flour layer to be on top. How you layer it is up to you. I find that the board produces the most consistent avalanches with the simplest possible layering. And all that looks like is salt on the bottom, a consistent layer of salt on the bottom, and then just flour on the top. And you can even compact the flour with your hands, but ideally you keep the two layers distinct and separate to best produce an avalanche. And the one thing that I've learned with this board that we'll see in this video I have is this board is not a real mountain. You can't induce a trigger like by putting a weight on top of the slab, but you need to tilt the board a little steeper because the friction part of the equation with this rock salt and the wood board is a little different than a real mountain. So yeah, pretty simple. We just layer our rock salt and then we put our flour on top of it like it's a snowstorm. So let me show you a video. And this was from December of this year. This was at Harrison High School. We were making avalanches. So it's going to be moving really slow. You can see the different numbers. The black line is about 38, 39 degrees. It's starting to avalanche. And you can even see kind of like those videos I showed of avalanches, how it breaks. Like it creates this distinct clear line and the slope fails kind of all at once, a lot like a real slab avalanche. You could show a loose avalanche with just the rock salt as well, like the snow not sticking to itself and being not cohesive would be the word. But yeah, that's essentially the activity. And it's really fun. It's hands-on. It's simple. You can get students to kind of engage with a guess and check type process of like, okay, so we know this is the slope angle avalanches happen on. We know that the snow needs to be layered in a certain way. How do we replicate an avalanche based on what we know? So I think that's really fun. That is all the material I had for you all. Essentially, if you are curious about doing avalanche-based activities, there's a bunch of different resources, like web resources. Our program, oh, I spelled our website wrong on this slide. That's pretty funny. Avalanche is spelled incorrectly in one of these links. But our website, mtavalanche.com, is just one resource. There's a lot of other resources. And like, if you want to bring avalanche safety info to a program near you or with an organization near you, I would start with looking at avalanche.org and seeing what avalanche center is closest geographically to you. And then you can also reach out to me if you have questions, like if you live in a different region that is a little farther than where we normally go to. Yeah, because what the kind of stuff, I think I sent the our school program info doc to you, Bethany, but we do a variety of lessons. I think the avalanche science is essentially what we teach is essentially what I taught you all. But we have like little steps that are more interactive. And some more videos because the kids love avalanche videos. They think they're so fun, which is great. Like, I mean, avalanches are serious and it's dangerous and people, get injured and can die from avalanches. But what we want students to take away is like understanding that avalanches can be dangerous, but also understanding that they have a lot of choice in whether or not they're going to be in places that avalanches can happen. So that's kind of like what we teach is sort of based on that. Like we teach, generalized avalanche awareness, avalanche science, avalanche rescue, and then backcountry preparedness too. And that's a program I developed because I'm involved in my local search and rescue group. And we think being able to go in at the middle school level and teach youth about being prepared to go outside is a great way to keep them safer. So yeah, that's kind of a bit about the program. And I talked a lot, so it seems like if you all have any questions, now's the time. I'm gonna stop my share. Yeah, does anyone have any questions?
So when you're using the inclinometer, how far away do you need to be like from the slope when you're reading it? Or
Oh,
like,
that's a really good question. And it's very dependent on the total, like the whole picture of a slope. So ideally, you want to grab a handful of approximations, and you're never like, oh, this slope is 31 degrees or 29 degrees, because we're never going to be that good at estimating. Like humans, estimation error is probably off by about 5 degrees. So you just want to take several snapshots and get a generalized picture of like, is this steep enough or is it not steep enough? If you're taking if you're taking a projection of a slope, um, you ideally want to be equal elevation with where you're taking a projection. It's kind of like surveying almost. And you can take projections from across a slope. You could take them from the bottom or from the top, but there's different techniques and different error associated with each of those estimations. Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
And
And
Shannon,
then,
Jessica asked in the chat if she could share your contact information. She is the one that's doing Code Girls United, and so they do app development with their students, and wondering
Mhm.
if maybe they have a group that wants to develop avalanche awareness app, if they could
Oh,
reach out to you.
yeah, I'm gonna put my email. Oh gosh,
Awesome.
I spelled friends wrong. Hold on, let me. This is why I do Avalanche stuff, not teach English.
And I will also share out these resources and the information that you sent me, including your email address, in a follow-up when I send the recording of this video of this webinar
Yeah,
as well.
and certainly even if I don't quite have the resources or info that coding group is looking for, I have a lot of connections with people who are developing different apps.
Cool.
Because as you could imagine, like I think like the big picture with avalanche awareness is why we teach people about avalanches and have all these different tools is like at the end of the day, especially in North America, most of our communities that are impacted by avalanches are recreationalists, and they're like choosing to go near avalanches.
Mm.
That's really different than in places like in the Himalaya or in the Alps. There's towns that are exposed to avalanche danger. And so why we teach so much about avalanches is because it's like people make choices that lead to them being caught in avalanches versus like communities that maybe have different exposure to avalanche danger. And that's why, you know, there's so many different companies that are like producing products, and the government is funding avalanche research and avalanche safety because like we really think, you know, one death is too many when people are choosing to go. So I think it's just the bigger context here in the United States is a little bit different than maybe some other countries, which I also think is a cool learning point for students to realize. Cool. Yeah, any other questions before we jump off the call? Boom. Yeah, and it sounds like Bethany has the document I sent to her and my contact info. So feel free to reach out whether or not I can actually like, you know, help with your specific question. We'll find out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon. I
Yeah.
did just drop in the chat a link for, we just have a quick little survey that we would love for attendees to take. And then also to let you guys know, we are um pivoting. Our Winter Wonders series is pivoting to spring a little bit, so we're talking about avalanche, and then coming up, it's a little change in the time and day. On Monday, February 24th at 11 a.m. we are going to have the Missoula Butterfly House and Insectarium. So we talked about snow today, we're going to talk about insects. tomorrow. I think that they're a pretty popular destination for field trips this time of year because folks might be getting antsy to get out of the snow and get someplace warm. So that's our next and final series, part of this series. So if you want to register for that and take a quick survey, any last questions for me or for Shannon? Cool. Well, definitely reach out if you need anything, guys. And thank you so much for being here today. Thank you again, Shannon. This was super cool.
Yeah, thank you all so much for tuning in, and don't hesitate to reach out.